they would be looking at humanity as a whole, which is the we space, right? All of us. For the individual, we're all up against these personal things of like, how do I manage me, right? So society has to manage the we have to manage the me.
Are you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Rob Scott Show. We are here to have a good discussion today. How you doing, Sarah?
Good. It's great to be back with everyone and our listeners. It's been a little bit of a hiatus, hasn't it?
Yeah, I took a little hiatus to do some other work for a little while, but happy to be back. And let's do something really valuable today. What are you thinking of talking about?
Yeah, so I think kind of just to get back into the groove of things, and we're going to try a little bit of a different format in 2019. And I think we're just going to be a little bit more candid with our conversations, and hopefully that you guys listening can really get some value out of what we're saying. And it can also make you think. I think one of our favorite things to do is kind of talk through these concepts and figure out a way to kind of translate them to kind of a broader sense of people. And we hope that we're reaching people who are also as interested in these things.
Yeah.
So I think we're just going to kind of vibe on some questions. I have some questions for you, Rob, and I think I'm just going to ask you and see what kind of comes out of your mouth today.
Or just words. Maybe just words.
Or just words.
Yeah. All right. What's up?
All right. So what do you think the biggest misconception of humankind is in our world today?
Wow, that's a big one. By the way, unfiltered, right? So the biggest misconception.
And can I just hop in and put a little bit more context on there? Like, if aliens landed on our planet and we're like, whoa, what are these humans all about? And we were being studied. Like, what do you think would be the outcome? That's kind of what that question is.
So, I talk about lenses sometimes and sort of how we get behind a certain lens. So I probably have a lens about this. It's funny because I was doing some thinking this morning and I made kind of a private recording for myself to think out some stuff. And it really came down to, once again, kind of meaning making and the fact that most human beings are not aware of the mechanism of their own attachment and their own belief-making structures, meaning that we will get attached to an idea, treat it like it's true, and then it's very, very difficult to shake us from that, even when it doesn't benefit the world, ourselves, 1,000 things, right? And so it's very much at the heart of what we do when we work with people is we get people to optimize their brain in a certain sense so that they're not attached to things that are holding them back in the same way. And so the greatest misconception that I see in the world today that leads to all the arguments, all the wars, all the disagreements is at the average level of human consciousness, people don't seem to be able to self-edit their own attachments in a way that looks really healthy to me. So people will sit and fight for a certain truth that they believe in, to the exclusion of cooperation, to the exclusion of their own health and benefit, by not knowing how to release that muscle. And there's actually a very clear way that we can learn to get better at that. And it's shocking to me that we don't know how to do that more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And it kind of leads me to another question, which is, can you think of a time or maybe a specific person who has ever been good at this, or a time when humanity has been better at this than we are in like current day? Or, I mean, this is such a widespread thing.
Yeah.
But why is that?
Well, so it's funny we're running a business here and there's a little bit of like, if you study marketing or you study how to talk about what you do, it's like, well, what makes you unique? And that's what, that question is sort of what drove me to think about this morning is like, what is this big problem? Like if I got to go be on the Joe Rogan Experience or something and he was like, what are you up to? What do you do? How do I answer that question? And what am I uniquely working on? So that I'm not just like your old, your next door neighbor, life coach, whatever, like what's really significantly different about what we do. And so I started to think about, well, we have this mechanism of attachment to not only desires and addictions, but like ideas and thoughts, right? We actually get like attached to what we know to be right, whether that's our family's opinion about something or how we feel about money or whatever our belief system is, religious, religious attachments, all these different things. And so who's done this right? Most of the people that have like started all the religions did this really, really well. Like, so the Buddha a long time ago was trying to explain this to us. And so anyway, to loop this back into like why I was talking about this in marketing and what I'm talking about here is there's this concern that comes up that like, oh, somebody else is going to get our special sauce and like steal it from us or teach it or do something else. And there's an egoic drive in all of us to be special and do all this stuff. And so when that arises in me to whatever degree, I might think for a second like, oh, well, like how am I special? But one thing, I don't have to worry about this because we've been trying to teach this to people for thousands of years. Like, it's not like this is new information necessarily. Like I try to talk about it in new ways. I try to share it and have a more cut through kind of path to freedom around this. But it's almost like a loop on itself because we end up feeling a certain way about, let's say, Buddhism or some strains of Christianity or whatever, and we start to go, oh, I know what that is. That's another form of kind of meaning making that we get attached to, and then the beauty of the thing doesn't have the same effect on us because it's not new or it's not useful to us. So in any case, that's a really complex way to like not answer your question, but there's a ton of people that have had the ability to do this well. And so, clearly, the Buddha comes up as someone who has been trying to tell us that we've got attachments, that, desire is this, and I don't know that he said it was a beautiful thing. I think desire is a beautiful thing in a lot of ways, but it also can be very much the detriment of our own happiness and well-being as we have cravings that we just keep acting on and we don't know how to kind of satiate that whole thing. All of that is this quality of mind that gets attached, that gets kind of stuck on something, and then it's an unfree mind that is that biggest misconception. And there's lots of people along the way that have been trying to teach us, more recently, people like Eckhart Tolle, Krishnamurti, Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, there's a ton of people. Often it's kind of associated with that Eastern discipline thing, but there's a lot of people in Western cultures too, psychologists that are working on this. The whole cognitive behavioral therapy, line of discipline is trying to work on helping us have better mastery over our meaning making, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I want to tell a quick story and then ask you another follow-up question. Just thinking about attachments and thinking about, our listeners as well. And part of the reason I think we took a hiatus is, and I'll share with our listeners, I was very not well for the last month or something. And I'm not a doctor person, and I was in another, like 12 different doctors, did all these tests, talking to all these different specialists, and no one could kind of figure out what's wrong. And there was like levels throughout that for me, as someone who has just historically been very healthy, of seeing what areas of my life that I'm attached to, that are more maybe unconscious to me. And then kind of the fallout from I'm feeling much better, and kind of the fallout from it is just making some basic lifestyle changes in my diet, in my habits. And I was just sharing with one of my friends recently that it's funny because there's certain foods, there's only a handful of foods that I just actually do not like to eat. When I eat, I don't feel good. And there's a ton of foods that I say, I don't like to eat those foods, but truly like, there's other things I prefer. And so I'm working with the nutritionist on my diet. I find it really funny that all these things I said, oh, I don't like those. Like truly that's not the right answer. But there's such an attachment that we have, I guess in food, if you just even look at that small kind of specific area of our life, if you guys think about like what you're eating and what your preferences for eating are, and then we just like grow these attachments. And so I guess my follow-up question to you on the attachments is I find it very fascinating that, because if you think of like Eckhart Tolle or Buddha or these kind of like enlightened consciousness type people, they're talking about how there's just this massive kind of freedom and connection when you unattach. When you think about the motivation for attaching to something, like this is the food I like to eat, these are the behaviors I like to do. It's such a kind of a contrast thing where you're kind of both trying to feel safe and attached, but like really what's going to get you there is the opposite of what you think.
Yeah.
In a way. And I find that fascinating. I wonder if you can talk more on that.
Yeah. And it's, I'm going to take a break in a second and just go turn off my cold air, because now I'm freezing. It was turned on, it's the middle of February, and I had to turn on the air here because the sun comes in and makes it kind of warm in my place. And so I'm going to turn that off in a second. But what's really interesting about what you just shared is that the attachment, the desire, this different kind of stuff it's really a survival mechanism, right? So habituating things is like a huge efficiency of the brain, right? If I find something that works for me, like this kind of food works for me or whatever, I don't have to reconsider everything from the ground up if I just go, hey, cantaloupe works for me, and I can just keep going back to cantaloupe or whatever, right? And this kind of house is fine for me. I don't have to every day find a new house or build a new house. Like, so habits have this like fantastic function to allow us to put actually down into the lower parts of our brain a bunch of the executive function, and we don't have to continue to make decisions which actually are very calorically expensive for the brain, right? So that whole like re-ideation of stuff. And so there's a huge function of the brain that is trying to get us attached to things, and in its best expression, it would be getting us attached to things that work for us, right?
Right.
and to a great degree, a lot of the stereotypes that we keep are, and this is in its worst expression, things like racism and whatever, but in better things, it might be like, just stay away from people who look dangerous, right? Like, so that's, right. Nobody would say that's racist. You would all say, oh, that's a safe thing to do. But it gets messy when those patterns are no longer healthy or they don't serve us anymore. But the pattern of walk away from dangerous people is a really healthy pattern that we shouldn't have to like rethink all the time. There's just these kind of click whir responses that we have to ingrained patterns where we don't have to think about them. And that's kind of what a habit is. It's like, I like this thing, I think this way, this is what's going on. And that helps us survive, right? The ability for that to be there allows us all this other executive function to think about different things or new things, and we sort of habituate, like we don't have to keep thinking about how to drive, right? Driving becomes this very background thing that we just do. But in the beginning, especially if you learn on stick or something, when you're my age, you maybe learned on a stick and you're trying to work that out, and it becomes very easy to like, at some point it's hard in a parking lot, then it's easy in a parking lot, but it's really scary on the street, like local street. And then your local streets, but like on the highway is super scary. Like that's too much. It's a little bit complex. And now we do that like while, some of us might be applying makeup and doing the radio and having a conversation. We're yelling at someone on the phone, and it's a total background thing, right? So that efficiency, that is habituation, right? That is an ability where we're gaining this attachment to something that becomes closer and closer to unconscious for us, which leaves our conscious mind all this other space to innovate, grow, stack things on top of that. What I'm now trying to tell people is that it's not the fact that habits are bad. It's not the fact that attachment itself is necessarily bad, unless the attachment is bad, right? Unless is something that doesn't serve us. So the quality of our preferences and the quality of repeating ourselves has a survival function, but above surviving, once we get into like, what is it to thrive? What is it to be really happy? It often can be the main mechanism that is holding us back from that. And because it's unconscious, it's very difficult for us to see.
Definitely. Yeah. I keep thinking, and I know you use specific words like duality or something, but I keep thinking of the word balance.
Yeah.
It's this magical thing that keeps us surviving, that allows us to become, innovators and creators. Is also like, if imbalanced is the thing that, like, I guess just using my own example, is the thing that's like, yes, I want to do, I don't want to get regular exercise. I want to keep eating sugars and white starches. Like it's also the thing that bears down these massive kind of patterns in our brain that ultimately may not work for us. And so it's just a funny thing to look at. And going back to that very first question of like, what do you think, if aliens landed and they're like, what are these humans doing on Earth? Like, I think they kind of would see a little bit of both. Of kind of that unmonitored,
both what, like
that unmonitored, like repetition of bad habits. Like people who repeatedly smoke, people who repeatedly. There's a million examples. Procrastination, that kind of thing. These cycles where we have a higher potential. That's like everyone would put their hand up and be like, "Yes, I can do that," but for whatever reason, don't, or not for whatever reason, for the survival patterns kind of don't, and kind of give into that like repeatedly harmful way, instead of exercising our ability to be creative and innovative and use that space for something bigger.
And I think I want to equate something. I think when we talked about you brought up balance, and balance is a really interesting concept, and we can either talk about it now, but I want to kind of footnote that for another talk later, because balance is something to strive for, but at the same time, a lot of excellence comes from being very out of balance in certain ways. And so, and also huge dysfunction can come from being out of balance. And we're almost always out of balance, because that's what life is like, hitting us in the face with what we're not yet prepared for. We're prepared for what we already know, to some degree, and then come at us. So we're constantly out of balance, like fighting about trying to find our balance. And so that's a longer, more interesting conversation. But I want to honor that alien question again for a second, because I don't think that aliens would come down and think that procrastination is our biggest problem, right? I think that they would come down and see war and violence and the fact that we're not cooperating properly and that we can't feed everybody, even though we can. Like, we can feed everybody and we haven't, kind of thing.
Right.
And so I think that a more advanced species that gets down here and has that kind of ability to show up on our planet, way ahead of us being able to get to them, I think that they would probably be ahead in ways like, well, why are they still fighting with each other? That seems silly, right? Like that whole, why haven't they figured out how to get along? And the root of that is this belief, this kind of attachment to an idea where my way is right, your way is wrong. And in that attachment, we fight. That mechanism of belief and attachment is also in some way what can hold us back and make us procrastinate and all that. So it's kind of all the same thing.
Right.
But I didn't,
what level you're looking at it.
Yeah, I didn't want to paint the picture like aliens would come down and go, wow, they're not feeding themselves well. I think the obvious one is, they're at war with each other. They're killing each other. They're not taking care of each other. That kind of thing seems the most, grossly offensive, probably from a different species looking at us. But they treat animals horribly. Like the things that we do to other conscious entities is systematically torturing to feed ourselves is when we kind of just don't have to, right? Like if that was our only way, that would be one thing, but we could be better at all that stuff. And because we're selfish and because we're egoic, we choose not to do that. And,
well, I was just going to say that's much more of an altruistic answer than I guess I was thinking specifically of the nutrition. And I'm like, that only affects me. What I put in my body generally affects me. And then it's just like, you look around, and if you really look at like portion control and food quality, as I have been, kind of look at a little bit closer in my own life, I'm like, wow, like even what's put on a plate in a restaurant, like that's not the amount of food that a human needs.
Right.
Like and we do that for ourselves. We go to a store, we pay money for something that's processed, that's probably not good for our bodies, and then we ingest it.
Yeah, totally.
Rinse and repeat. And I'm like, when you really think about it, that's a really strange thing to do, but it's easy and it's convenient and
it's pleasurable, right?
It's pleasurable, right?
Pleasurable in the moment. You're probably choosing things that are tasty and fun to eat, right? So that's taking pleasure over future good to ourselves, right? That's like the immediate versus delayed gratification muscle having a problem. The other thing too, not to keep going back to aliens, but the alien question brings up a kind of what's wrong with society, which is a big we question, right? Mm-hmm. So the reason that's like between people and it's because they would be looking at humanity as a whole, which is the we, which is the we space, right? All of us. For the individual, we're all up against these personal things of like, how do I manage me, right? So society has to manage the we have to manage the me and, or the I, right? That's a great point. I think that distinction really matters because at levels of government and in running our planet and in running our own choices, those things are not always aligned, right? What is good for me may not be good for the we, and what's good for one corporation may not be good for the whole planet. But where we're motivated to move, we're constantly in that space of like, are we more considerate of the whole of society and all people, or are we mostly, does it all come down to what I care about as an individual and what I need in this moment? And, there's certain people who actually think that the best thing in the world is if we all just really took care of ourselves and that would be the whole thing. There's people on the totally other end that are like, if we just consider the we all the time, that would be the best way to do it. The reality seems to me is that both of those perspectives, both of those levels of consciousness are arising all the time, the I and the we, and they need to be in concert with one another. They're not the same thing, and they need to both be considered. And there are ways that we could do that more smartly if we thought about both of them,
Sure. And I guess, I don't know if this is an appropriate podcast question, but we could potentially, I guess, go ahead and edit it out if we need to. But do you think that war is inevitable? More context on that, judging on the fact that there are these kind of great thought leaders or consciousness leaders, like all the people, people that start religions, people that are, they're all preaching peace. And so, but there's also something really, I think, incredible about humans, is that we can kind of take a stand behind something,
Yeah.
But that leads to attachment. So I'm just curious your thoughts on war in general, and if that has a function in our society at all.
Conflict absolutely has a function. I mean, at every level of life, there's conflict, there's life, there's death, there's bouncing into things, there's constant kind of energy where that's rubbing. And so I think it would be silly to not take a second to go, that's a hard question, because those words don't mean the same thing, right? Like the way we held war hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago was very different and up close and gruesome by a lot of things than the way we war today, right?
True.
Do I think that we theoretically can and should kind of evolve to a place where we're having conflict in a very, very different way? 100%. And I have we're trending in that way, right? Mm-hmm. Even though we see that we're in this very long and persistent war, as the United States is in, I think, one of the longest continual conflicts we've ever been in as a country. But the amount of deaths and the amount of war, and I don't have the stats, those are trending down as compared to historically, I believe, right? I think that's true. And our ability to interact, while it will have spikes of conflict and all these things, I think that we're tending toward more cooperation, understanding what it is to be global. I mean, it wasn't very long ago that we didn't even know all the cultures on planet Earth, right? It wasn't very long ago that we were less than 1 billion people forever, and now we're very global, very technologically connected, and that's all very new. And so we're still rubbing and bumping into each other. But I get this sense that we're going to move closer and closer, in our lifetime, many lifetimes from now, we're moving toward getting along differently and better, and managing our own needs and automating things more and more and more. And will that have its challenges and messes? Of course. So conflict has its place, but the way that we conflict or have conflict, I would hope that could evolve and change and become less gruesome, more gentle, less murderous, more.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. And that totally makes sense. It's almost kind of like pulling apart, the difference between war and conflict, and what one is necessary and how can we change how we react to it. And then it also makes it, when you said the we and the I space, and those should be in concert. I love that. I wonder, not that we have to go deep into balance, but I wonder if the better word there, or that you would like better is duality or something. And maybe we can talk a little bit for our listeners on different, I don't know, to kind of more places that we can find not balance, but maybe duality, and holding multiple things at the same time versus, looking at specifically maybe ways that we attach to things, that both can be great for us, and then things to be aware of to be more balanced. I keep finding the word.
Balance is a great word, because I don't know that that's duality, right? So duality is good and bad. I wouldn't call that balance necessarily, right? You could balance duality. Duality to me, in the way that I like to talk about it, means that we are splitting the world into two, meaning there's preference and not preference, there's good and bad. And the thing that is desirable there to learn for the human animal is the capacity to live non-dual, right? To be in the isness of something without the judgment muscle working on it, to call it bad or good necessarily. And that's a whole different conversation, probably.
Definitely.
For another time. So let's simplify your question a little bit and say, are there places where attachment is good? I think I heard you say that, or preferences are good.
I guess that attachment can be helpful to our listeners, where we're hey, it might be really helpful to you, and places where we would want our listeners to be aware of how that attachment might be be harming them or keeping them from achieving whatever.
Yeah. So let's go back to belief for a second. There was a time in my life where I really thought that belief itself was the problem, right? And again, when I say that, that's like charged for people who have strong religious beliefs and all that kind of stuff. So just try to hang in with me while I go through this if you're one of those people. And what I realize now is that it's not, what I'm saying about belief is when you are assured of a meaning, right? Belief meaning that I'm assured of what that meaning is, and that's all that means. Is belief is an assuredness of meaning. Like I know what that means, right? So I get attached to what reality is about a certain thing. And the truth may be very different than that. So we can believe things that are false, right? We can believe things that are false all the time. And just in general, I think that most of us would not want to believe things that are false, right? That sounds like an error, like that kind of a problem, right? But you can also believe things that are true. You can not necessarily know them as truth and happen to believe something that's absolutely true. And so that wouldn't be a bad thing. The other thing too is that effectiveness of taking things from that conscious place where we have to consider it and do it and all that, that function of the brain where we're putting back the ability to drive back into our unconscious so that we don't have to use all the energy. Like that's a wonderful part of being human.
Yes. Yeah.
If it's not set to do heroin, but instead it's set to go to the gym, right? But if it's set to go to the gym so much that you're whittling away because you don't feed yourself well and all you do is go to the gym and you're injuring yourself, then it's bad going to the gym, right? So it's like, so to this point of like balance or what's important, what I've come to realize in my own life and in how I'm trying to help the world and what we do in our business is that it's not that beliefs are bad. It's the fact that if we don't have the ability to kind of check in on our attachments, if we don't have this ability to see what we are believing, then we are left at the mercy of kind of hoping they're set up well for us, right?
Right.
Hoping that they're okay. Are my beliefs all right or not? And if you develop the ability that we kind of call the fundamental shift that we talk about, where you can begin to see, right, this, oh, that's what my brain is doing here. You can see your own attachments. You can see them when you're in an argument with somebody. You can see them when you notice your own habits not kind of lining up the way you want to. You can see them all of a sudden. And the default isn't just to accept how you're not showing up or you're not the person you want to be or whatever, but instead to challenge it and then change it. That becomes what the fundamental shift in being able to literally grow and change very, very rapidly and very, very quickly. So, you know, I'll ask the question out to maybe the listener. What is most important for you to habituate to do that you would like set to autopilot that maybe you're not doing now, right? So what are the things that you would like to kind of take on?
Right.
That's an eating habit. Maybe that's working out. Maybe that's regularly looking at your checking account and doing your accounting more regularly. Maybe that, you know, whatever those are. And then what are the ones that you're doing that you wish you weren't doing, right? What are the habits of like, oh, I'm eating sugar every single night, or maybe for some of us, I'm doing drugs, or I drink too much, or, you know, I treat people poorly, or I talk to myself horribly every day. I say things like, you're so stupid, I hate you, whatever, about myself to myself, right? These are all habits that we might want to put down. Here are habits that we'd like to ingrain, and that's individuated, right? Like somebody might be totally dialed in on fitness and food and whatever.
Sure.
Somebody else is totally dialed in on money and wealth and that. But, you know, what is it for you that you most need?
Well, and I love that. And I think that it is, I love that you answered a question that I wanted you to plant a flag on one side or another with the, hey, you just need this skill, right? And that is key, because I think something that I think about a lot is how often people are like, they just don't have an accountability to themselves. And they're like, I don't know why I did that, or I don't know why I keep doing that, or I'm not happy and I don't know, like, and they don't have a drive to like change it. There's like some kind of, I feel like apathy is like such a scary thing for me. I'm like, I never want to have apathy. Yeah. There's almost like an apathy or like a removal from people who are, I mean, and I'm sure that listeners and you and everyone knows someone who just repeatedly is like, I'm doing something I don't want to do, whether that is not going to the gym, whether that's procrastinating, whether that's staying up too late, whether that's doing drugs, whether that's whatever, changes in the business relation. There's a wide range of serious to not serious things, but it's like something that I just keep seeing repeated in so many people. And so that skill that you're talking about of being able to say, here are the things that I'm doing that I'm attached to that are helpful, and here are the things, what are some things that I would like to be attached to instead that would change my life or help me in certain ways. Like that seems to be what's missing universally.
Yeah. And it's not for the way you kind of just said that was, I'm so sad when I see people doing that. The way I sort of think about it is we're all doing that to some degree, right? We're all doing addictive things that feel good in the moment that maybe aren't optimized. And I'm not suggesting that you should be perfect or that you should be optimized all the time.
Sure.
I think if you're consciously blowing it out one night and just doing whatever you want to do, like that's fine as long as it's in balance, right? Like as long as it's not completely putting you into the floor, right? Totally ruining you. I also have a lot of compassion for the person who has no idea how to address this, right? Like we get set up with these patterns so deeply and very, very early. And, it took me a lot of challenge and difficulty in my life to kind of wake up to the ability to go, oh, wait, I'm doing these things. Like for most people, it's very, very behind the scenes. It's very, very difficult to notice that, oh, I'm just doing this again. To them, it's like, well, what else would I do? I don't know what else I would do. I don't. And what actually the most divisive mindset might be, that's just who I am, right? I just am the person that's going to die early because I feed myself this way, and
that's what I meant about apathy, I guess. That's what I was saying is that that's such a sad, to me, that's so sad because it's like, especially when somebody else can see something more, which often other people can see more.
Yeah.
You can see about yourself, but you're like, oh no, like that's not, there's a different way to be.
Yeah. So earlier, and why don't we, I'm going to wind this down here. Is that okay? I mean, like, this is good.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't have any other pressing questions.
So you had taken on that you weren't feeling so well for a while, which by the way, I'm very happy that you're better. But that wasn't the only reason. We also spent a lot of time, we created a training that I think is really, really important for people to check out. It is called the Fundamental Shift Training. And it almost feels perfect to what we talked about. This really wasn't.
It does map. It did
really
map.
Wasn't planned. I wasn't sure I was going to pitch this, but anyway, it's a free training. You can go to fundamentalshift.com and sign up to take that free training immediately. It will take you through. It actually shares a little bit about my history, so you can get to know a little bit more about me. It goes.
Yeah, and I learned a lot even during that. So
did you going through it with me? Yeah. So. It's got 3 secrets in it. You're going to learn how to recode your mind. It's very, very powerful. I highly recommend it. And there is a way that you can go further after if you want to check that out. But the training itself is very, very powerful. Go check it out. Go to fundamentalshift.com and you can sign up right there to get your free training. And besides that, I am really happy that we're back and we're doing this. I hope this was valuable. And Sarah, you're amazing. I'm glad you're feeling better, by the way.
Me too. Thanks.
And, let's all start to kick it for 2019. We're going to have a great year this year. All right.
We'll talk to you guys again soon. Thanks
for
tuning in.
Bye-bye.